Hey everyone, welcome back to Leandra the TBR Zero. Today I will be showing my June spreads, but also I'll be taking the time to create a mid-year check-in page. This will be a page where I pretty much collect all of my statistics from the last 6 months, and they will help me, hopefully, navigate through the next 6 months in what I want to continue doing and what I want to stop doing or change. I drew a TBR list as always, but this time I ended up organizing it by genre. I don't typically do that, but I thought it was appropriate for this month. I included a days read in June calendar. It's really just nice to look at, and it motivates me to keep reading every single day. I also always match my TBR page with a books read page because I like to compare which books I actually read in the month and see if any just random inspiration found its way into my books read page. I read Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's first 2 mysteries featuring Sherlock Holmes. They were disappointing, but I think it was worth it because I got to draw a deer stalker, and I was quite nervous at the time, but I think it came out gorgeous. And I don't think this will be the last time I read Sherlock Holmes, but I think I'm going to give myself some time to lower my expectations. For the Clackety, this was a NetGalley arc, and the reason why I included these creepy black arms where a spider is crawling between them is because the Clackety is actually a shadow monster, and this was a middle grade horror read. It was super fun, so that's why I included that. Of Mice and Men is obviously a classic that many know, but I'd never read it before. It made me cry. I don't know if I could handle reading it again, but I included a bunny as well as some wheat because I think that both of them are pretty important elements to the story. I also read Wonderscape by Jennifer Bell, a completely different book of Mice and Men. I included the door that the 3 protagonists enter. This is a middle grade adventure novel, and they pretty much enter the 25th century through this door that included shells and this strange blue mist that smelled of the sea. It was just amazing. I also had a reread this month, which was Murder at the Vicarage. It's one of my favorite Agatha Christie novels, to be honest. I just love the proto-feminism that seeps its way through, even though Agatha Christie isn't typically a feminist person, at least known in history. But the flowers are because Miss Marple pretty much solves the mystery from her garden. Rainbow is a collection of trans and queer stories. I was so grateful to read this collection during Pride Month, but I think everyone should read it whenever they get the chance. Legendarium is the second book in the Wonderscape series. This time I included Cloud, the protagonist's mimic dog. Just think of a very futuristic, sophisticated robot dog, and you're on the right track. I included the map to my favorite quest that the protagonists go through, and it's the Land of the Outlaws. It was just such a fun book. I am so impressed that Belle is able to keep the energy that she had with Wonderscape, and I think it's a middle grade adventure book anyone should read. I also include some monthly stats. I went back through all 6 months to include this page actually, and this helps me quickly see how many books I read, where did I get those books from, which genres were most popular, and also some other fun stats like debut books from authors or repeat authors, because I think it'd be really interesting to know how many new voices I added to my year, as well as those authors that I just can't help but return to. So for this next spread, I ended up doing it over 2 pages, and I was smart this time and made sure to write down all of the stats that I wanted to include ahead of time. So most bullet journalers probably already know to do this, so this is nothing new for you. But if I at least help one person in giving this advice, if you know what you want to include, it just makes the process so much faster. And I made sure to also go through my entire bullet journal to find these stats. That's the other thing. It's time consuming mainly because you have to check every single book that you are looking at if you want these statistics to be accurate. I freehand most of my letters and drawings. I think only 2 book reviews in the past have made me actually go and stencil out something prior to adding it to the bullet journal. That may be a bit reckless, according to some perfectionists, but I don't mind doing it. I enjoy the homemade look of it. And actually, if you look at these letters, it turned out pretty good. I'm not gonna lie, I'm impressed by how symmetrical they all look. I was not sure how it was gonna turn out, and I decided to flare it up a little bit by adding kind of a rainbow highlight to each letter. Also, you can see that I messed up a little bit with the C, but once all of the letters are on the spread, you don't fully notice it, especially once I include the highlighted colors. Once the statistics are shown on this, you can pretty much play with it however you want. Statistics that I found important may not be important to you. That's okay. You just need to go through your own goals. And that was actually one of the things I did do. So at the beginning of the year, one of the general spreads that I included were 22 goals for 2022. And it was a great reference for when I was trying to figure out what statistics I actually wanted to include on this 2-page spread. So if you had that in your own bullet journal, don't forget that that's a great resource for you to utilize, and make sure you check in and see what you're on track for and which goals you completely forgot about. I pretty much continue with a colorful theme for this one. I was flying at the seat of my pants, trying to figure out how I wanted to organize it. I think that that's something I always have to do organically. Again, it could be a really good place for you to brainstorm how you want to organize it, how you want it to be themed, but I was just impressed with myself for pretty much getting my information ahead of time, so it might be too much for me to ask myself to actually plan out a theme and everything else that goes along with it. One of the 2, stats that I was super interested in checking was top genres, as well as the genres that were a bit out of my comfort zone, just to compare. My favorite genres pretty much correlate with the genres that were my most read for the past 6 months: mystery, historical fiction, and science fiction. I especially love to blend mystery and historical fiction together. For the books that are out of my comfort zone, those are classics, romance, and erotic fiction, as well as young adult. Later on in the video, I include stats that show how many books within each genre that I did read, and it's very interesting to compare them because, to be expected, my top genres were obviously the most read. That's why they're the top genres, but out of my comfort zone genres did end up being some of my least read genres, and I thought I was actually doing a great job including more of them in my reading, but apparently just not as much as my top genres. I also thought it could be fun to include the oldest or earliest publication book, as well as my newest or newly published book for what I've read so far. The oldest book I've read is The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which was published in 1886. And the newest release that I've read was, in fact, Legendarium, and it came out in May 2022, so only about a month ago at this point. I really enjoy comparing that, especially because I don't tend to read books, especially that are earlier than the 20th century. I am really just comfortable with modern and contemporary reads that I often end up forgetting to include older books in my reading, and that's why one of my goals this year was in fact to include classics, because classics, of course, include books that were published in the 19th century and earlier. I am really on the fence when it comes to star ratings, but I've had a lot of fun this year experimenting with them, especially because I understand that they're subjective. I think that that is the key to success when you're using or relying on star ratings to read a new book or to grasp your own experience with a book that you just finished. It's just so important to remember that they're subjective. For instance, I think that what I've marked as 5-star reads are books that I could see myself reading again. That's not always the case, but a lot of times I think back to those books and think, oh my goodness, in a few years I would love to reread that book. And when it comes to 4-star reads, I think that's the missing component. I loved the book so much, but I just could not see myself reading it again, or I think it's so important that people read it that I want to give it 4 stars for that reason. And then if it's a 3-star read, then I just think it's a solid book. I can appreciate that there's an audience for it. It just, may not have been the perfect read for me specifically as a reader. And 2- and 1-star reads are really rare for me, which I guess I'm really happy about. I will admit that there is some variability, especially since the books I own and tend to take out from the library or request on NetGalley are books that I am pretty confident are in my wheelhouse for the books I like to read. And of course, I'm trying to take chances this year, but predominantly the books I pick up are books that I know I'm going to take some type of joy out of. So it's quite rare for me to get a 2 or a 1-star read. With that said, when I do, I also tend to give those ratings when I see a lot of problematic material. So I can tell if an author is racist during the time that they were living. That is pretty indicative of classics, and that's probably one of the reasons why I don't really like reading classics. But for instance, one of my problems with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was that one of his 2 stories relied heavily on stereotypes and racism for the crime to make sense, and that just doesn't fly with me. I don't think that that's a book that I would recommend to others, and that's why I ended up giving it such a low rating. Now, the next 2 statistics that I included were acquisition methods and my longest and shortest reads. For acquisition, I just think it's really helpful for me to monitor where I'm getting these books from, especially since my goal on this channel this year, just in my life, is to lessen my physical TBR to a more manageable number. So I'm thrilled to see that out of all of the different methods that I get my books, the largest one is my physical TBR. The one worrying aspect is that my second most utilized method is purchasing books. However, I've gotten way more comfortable with NetGalley. As you can see, I've taken 7 books out thus far from that outlet. I also am now working at a library, so I look forward to upping my library and Libby numbers as well. I also just included 2 rereads because I think that that's interesting to note as well, and that's something that I don't do very often. For my longest and shortest books, I am a bit sad that I haven't read a book over 500 pages. It's something I've been noting over the past couple months, that I really do avoid longer reads. And I'm not sure if that's just because in my head I'm thinking get as many books done as possible, or I am suddenly just not having the attention span for a longer book. But The Opposite of Butterfly Hunting by Ivana Lynch was a memoir, and I'm so pleased to know that my longest book thus far was a nonfiction book. That's another area that I want to get better at, reading more nonfiction. My shortest book was the same book that was my oldest book, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, so that's quite funny. I also included my favorite debut authors and favorite repeat authors. I just think that that was really good to implement, especially since those are two areas that I include in my monthly check-in stats. So for favorite debut authors that were just new to me, that doesn't mean that they're new to everybody or it's a brand new book, were Jamie Littler, because I read his book Frost Heart. It's a middle grade polar fantasy. Craig Rice, who was an author during, I believe, the 1930s and 1940s, and she wrote mysteries, which I fell in love with the one book I read by her, and it happened to be her debut. I also read Jessamine Chen's The School for Good Mothers. Cannot wait to see what this author produces next. And then Leslie Vedder wrote The Bone Spindle. I've already pre-ordered her second book in the series, so you can tell I absolutely adored it. I also included my favorite repeat authors, and again, the reason why they're my favorites is just because their books got 5 stars, and that goes for my favorite debut authors as well. So all of these books end up getting 5 stars, and I would love to reread it again. So Maureen Johnson, because the Truly Devious series is brilliant. Sherry Thomas, because I love the Lady Sherlock series, can't wait to continue. Emily St. John Mendel. I read Station 11 a few years ago, and this year I read Sea of Tranquility. It was just as brilliant. And of course, Agatha Christie is someone that I can't help but continue to read. The other stats I included were social media followers. I don't think that's the most important thing, but I do like to track it, especially since I'm quite new to BookTube especially. Thank you so much if you're one of my 75 followers. That probably does not seem like very much to most people, but I am just over the moon that I have that many after only being on this platform for 6 months. I also have about 2,500 followers for Instagram. If you're interested in following me there, my handle is @greatgraydays_book-reviews. You will see my face. It's the same face on this channel, so hopefully you can join me there and we can chat about books. I also included at the very bottom plans for the next 6 months. Those were pretty much just reminders for me to read more of certain things and read less of others. My main priority is just to read less purchased books. I would love to up my numbers in other areas and then see a decline in purchased books. You can see that 30% of the books I have read thus far were from purchased or pre-ordered books, and I want that to be less. This is the main reason why I include these stats, because it's going to be really interesting to compare them to books, to my stats for the next 6 months. I fully intend to do a similar page like this later on and see at the end of December where I am and what has changed, especially at these many percentages that I've included. Just for fun and to add a little bit more texture to this information-heavy spread, I included different drawings, like a puzzle piece for my top genre, which was mysteries. I've read 15 this year, which is crazy. And then out of my comfort zone reads, I did the, masks, because for some reason that reminds me of classics. I include a flower, and that is an homage to Miss Jane Marple, who solves mysteries from the comfort of her garden. And then I'm creating a little martini glass, because in Craig Rice's novel, 8 Faces at 3, drinking is just one additional character to all of these just wild investigators. I highly recommend it if you're looking for a golden age mystery that is just full of chaos. And then I decided to include drawings that represented my oldest book and newest book read. For Legendarium, I created a fun little map. I, make it a little almost looking like worn and burnt. I just love that kind of look of it. And then I draw a very fun scene of trees and mountains and a village. I then, for my oldest book, will include, beakers and some mysterious liquids and gases, because with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, there is definitely some chemistry going on. It reminded me of Frankenstein meets Sherlock Holmes. That's the only way I can describe it. If you haven't read it, as you can see, it's my shortest book at 84 pages, so it's a novella that you can easily read in one day. To discuss more about what I want to do more of for the 6 months coming in 2022, I do want to try and read more nonfiction. One of my goals was to read, I believe it was 12 nonfiction books. That's just not going to happen, but I would like to try to get as close to that number as possible at this point. I also want to focus on more books from my one spread, which is 22 books in 2022. I definitely, again, will probably not get to 22 books that I've listed, but I want to get as many as possible. I also want to read more translations. I want to participate in #ReadChristy2022. I did that last year for a little bit, and I did start doing that at the beginning of January, but I just let it get away with me, especially because a few of the books I didn't own, I couldn't get the motivation to go borrow it, so that's why I didn't actually participate. I also want to complete a few series. That's one of my goals this year, is to, I think, finish 3 series, because I'm so bad about that. And I think I'm on track for at least 2 series, so we'll see how the next 6 months go on that one. And of course, if I'm not purchasing new books, but I still want to read new books, then the library and NetGalley is where I have to go. I also want to keep my current schedule of 1 booktube video a week. I think that's manageable. I enjoy it, and yeah, it just will keep me consistent. But I am so pleased with how this ended up going. I really didn't know what I was going to be doing for mid-year check-in, and I just think all of this information works perfectly for me. Again, this may not be every statistic that you personally want to know when you're creating your own, but it's, I think, helpful to see what's important to other readers, and then you'll see the gaps where you're thinking, oh, actually, what I want to monitor is which nonfiction books I'm reading, or how many ebooks I'm reading, or am I, neglecting an entire genre. That's something I thought about, is writing down which genres I just haven't read anything by or about, but I think I've been pretty good with my diversity. I will say that my goals when it comes to diverse authors and characters, one thing I've noted is that I am missing Black authors. Not entirely, but I want that to be a higher statistic. At the moment, when it comes to diverse voices, I am leaning more towards Asian American authors and Latinx authors. I think that those are great voices to have. I'm so grateful that I found some brilliant authors to support and to recommend to others, but I have been upset with myself and with my collection to see that I don't have as many Black voices in my TBR bookshelves that I would like. So I think that I'll be heavily leaning on the library and NetGalley at the moment, just to make sure that I'm not missing that important contribution to literature. Thank you so much, everybody, for getting to the end of the video. If you have, I hope that it was helpful to you, soothing to you, or got you thinking about books in a way that makes you really excited and interested to read more. I am so grateful to everyone who supports this channel in any way possible. If you enjoyed yourself, please remember to give the video a like, consider subscribing, and ringing that bell so that you're notified every time a new video like this or some other type of video from my channel is uploaded. Everybody, have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!